That'll do it for me, Kingswood. Yow! Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, or whenever you're watching this, and welcome back to Get Real. Yeah, Night Watch did like a casual thing last week, so I'm just kind of piggybacking off of that. I didn't feel like moving all the setbacks, so, here we are. I think that's the earliest that's ever cut me off. Anyway, so there's a lot that's obviously happened in the past 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a long time to wait, so there's always going to be a lot to talk about. So let's not waste any time, and we're going to get started off by talking about the World Cup. Now, admittedly, going into this, I am not the most massive soccer fan in the world, but I'm a big fan of the United States, and I'm a big fan of Christian Pulisic and his beautiful, beautiful eyes. So let's get started by talking about the fact that, unfortunately, they did in fact lose. They lost 3-1 to the Netherlands in the first stage of the knockout round. They made it out of the group stage, which is better than they did last time. I think overall my biggest takeaways about this team is that they were just too young. They were the second youngest team in the entirety of everybody who made it into the group stage. And obviously, against Wales, we had a win, and then due to just recklessness, quite frankly, we gave up a penalty kick that obviously ended up in it being a draw. And not that that would have affected the game against the Netherlands per se, but that's just a good example of how it was. Actually, if we could get the goal against Wales, it was a very good play by Weah off the feed from Pulisic. It was just very well. Because they couldn't keep up with us on this play. But unfortunately, youth and energy creates stuff like that, but what it also creates is those mistakes that I was talking about. The other thing I'll say is that they just need more and or better strikers, just because our defense was pretty good, again, because of that youth and energy, but we just didn't get, honestly, we didn't have guys who were tall enough. Every time we had a corner kick, some tall dude from the other team would just come in and bop, send it back out to midfield, and there was just nothing we could do about it. So all those corner kick opportunities we had, we weren't able to take advantage of. I mean, obviously, Pulisic was a good offensive engine. We have actually the goal that he had, if we could get that. And I like him, but we need more than just him. You see, he comes in here. He sacrificed himself on this play a little bit, so I give him a lot of credit for that, for taking one for the team. But it's, yeah. So, and I think a lot of that problem comes from the fact that the best athletes in the United States are just playing other sports, obviously. A lot of our best athletes play American football, or they play basketball, or maybe they play hockey, they play baseball. So I'm not saying we should stop having guys play basketball, football, hockey, baseball. I love all those sports. But if we could get one or two of those generational athletes who play the other sports, just one or two of them to switch over to soccer, I'm not sure we'd have a chance at winning just because every other country has all of their best athletes playing soccer. But, we could make it past the first round of the group stage. That'd be nice. We had some impressive moments regardless, though. My biggest takeaway is that it was growth. We're a young team. The next World Cup, we can be better. So that's all I really have to say about that. And let's move on and talk about the NBA. And instead of doing our usual kind of recap thing that I like to do on this show, we're going to talk about, as you can see on the bottom, the MVP award. Because while I like the MVP award, I like the idea and I like what it represents, I think on a certain level, it's kind of gotten lost to us just because of, well, I'll get into it. So we're going to start out with this year specifically. There are so many candidates for MVP. If we could come over here. Thank you. There's the guys behind me. There's like Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. There's the guys below me, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic. That's just 5. There's like double that many. You got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander averaging like 30 and 10 or something ridiculous like that. Heck, if Jaylen Brown was on another team, he might be an MVP candidate. Anthony Davis now, at the past few games, he dropped like 44, and then he dropped 55, and then, well, I'll get to what happened to him last night a little bit later in the show, but it was kind of embarrassing. But regardless, he looks like an MVP again. So I think the problem is there's gonna be one MVP at the end of this year, which means that looking back on this season in like 10 years, we're not going to remember all these great seasons that are happening right now because all of these guys are playing fantastic basketball, but unfortunately there's only one award to give out. And part of that, admittedly, isn't due to the fact that everybody's playing fantastically. A lot of these guys are. But part of it is just that number inflation is through the roof. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, great player, but he's on a bad team, so obviously he's going to average some more points. And then there are guys who are just averaging a ton of points, and it's like, where are you getting this from? Paulo Banchero rookie. I'm not surprised that he's averaging numbers. What I'm surprised about is that his backup, Bol, hilarious name, by the way, he got hurt. Bol came in, and Bol was averaging like 15 and 10. This is his 4th year in the league. His first 3 seasons, he averaged like 4 points a game. He suddenly comes in, he's averaging 15. Now, you could say it was because he was getting opportunities like he wasn't before, and that's true. I would agree with that, but also some of that has to do with the fact that numbers are just, the pace is faster, people are shooting more efficiently, which, credit to the players for shooting more efficiently, but that's just kind of the way the sport is headed. Here's the other problem with the MVP that I'm seeing. People don't seem to care as much anymore about it, and not in terms of players, but I mean as fans and as analysts, we don't seem to care as much. Nikola Jokic is a back-to-back MVP 2 times now, which is something that only great players have done, with the exception of Steve Nash. He did it, and he's not a great player, but I'll talk about that someday. Anywho, nobody's talking about him. And it's not like the Nuggets are bad, but it's just like, we look at MVPs as a regular season award, but the problem is, with the way that we talk about basketball these days, we don't care as much anymore about the regular season, which I think is kind of a shame, because while I care about the playoffs, if I were an NBA player, I would rather win a finals MVP than a regular season MVP. Don't get me wrong. But because of the way that has shifted to a more playoff-centric, well, did you win rings kind of conversation, we're going to forget about a lot of players who didn't win rings. Charles Barkley, fantastic player, but he's on NBA Inside on TNT, and all they ever talk about when it gets to basketball discourse is, Chuck, you didn't win the MVPs. Or it's Kenny, he's like, well, Chuck, you didn't win an MVP. And it's like, well, yeah, he won the MVP and he didn't win a finals MVP. Can we talk about the MVP, though? Because I think he was a great player. Guy like Steve Nash, who admittedly I did just disrespect, but we're going to forget about a guy like him. I don't want to forget about a player like Nikola Jokic just because he didn't have success in the playoffs. A player like Tracy McGrady, who doesn't get as much respect as he deserves, So I think as a basketball fandom, we need to shift back to caring about the MVP more, because there's a lot of players having great seasons, and we need to really focus on that, or else we're going to let great basketball pass us by. And the final problem with the MVP that I see is that the criteria just changes too often. And it just becomes hard for players to know what they have to do to win an MVP. For a long time, it was the best player on the best team. That's honestly how Michael Jordan won a lot of his. That's how LeBron James won a lot of his. That's how Steve Nash won both of his. He was the engine for the best offense. But past couple of years, we had Jokic win. They weren't the best team, but he was very clearly the most valuable player on that team. A few years before that, Russell Westbrook won. But in between that, Giannis won a couple, and he was just the best player on the best team. Now, I think he was also the best player, but that doesn't make him the most valuable. I think in 2020, LeBron was the most valuable, but Giannis won the MVP because he was just the best player. So I think there are 2 takeaways we need to have. As a fandom and as an analyst community, we need to focus more on the great seasons that players have, whether or not they keep it up in the playoffs, because great basketball is great basketball. And then on the NBA side of it, they need to finalize the criteria that they use, because frankly, it's got to be confusing for players, because it's confusing for me, and all I ever do is think about basketball. I don't even have to worry about playing. But that's going to do it for me on this topic, everybody. We'll be right back after this. Unfortunately, that bumper is a little bit out of date, but I do stand by the fact that you can call the men's soccer football, but women's soccer is soccer, because we win every time, all right? Shout out to the women's national team. Anyway, welcome back to 2-Minute Headlines. It's the segment that writes itself. I have 2 minutes. I do a bunch of headlines, and here we go. All right, we're going to start off with Anthony Davis got sick. This is what I was alluding to earlier. It's so weird, because he left the game. Before I tuned in last night, he was out of the game. And he had 1 point, and he played 8 minutes. I was like, oh, did he get hurt? And then at halftime, they're talking on NBA Inside, and they're like, oh, yeah, he left the game with flu-like symptoms. Anthony, why would you leave after that? You have an opportunity to have like a Jordan-like flu game, and you just passed that up? Come on, man. That would have been great for his MVP case. Anyway, moving on. Brady does it again. Yep, Monday Night Football, 2 straight touchdown drives in the fourth quarter to win it against the Saints. Admittedly, the Saints aren't the best outfit, but it was Brady doing what Brady does. I still don't really believe in the Buccaneers, unfortunately. As much as I like Tom Brady, I wish he had retired, but I still like him as a guy. As I wish I could believe in them, but I just don't. The return of Deshaun Watson, yeah, he didn't look great. I mean, now, admittedly, it was his first game in like 700 days, so I'm going to give him a pass for not looking fantastic. But the reality is, he didn't look fantastic. They beat the Texans, but like that's the Texans. They're 1-9-1, 1-10-1 now because they lost to the Browns. Like, which is maybe someday I'll talk about the Texans because it is impressive that you could be that bad at football. It's like, anywho. And finally, Suns versus Celtics tonight on ESPN. This isn't really a highlight per se. This is just a game that I think is going to be really good. So if you have a chance to tune in, do. I think this is a potential finals preview. Now, I don't have the most confidence in the world in the Suns, particularly. The Celtics I have a little bit more confidence in just because they made it to the finals last year. The Suns haven't, the Suns did it, but then they got absolutely mollywopped by Giannis. In fairness, though, we got mollywopped by the Warriors. Anywho, this is going to be a really good game. I'm calling my shot right now. Potential finals preview. Yeah. And with 16 seconds to go, I made it through all 4 headlines. Go me, right? We'll be right back after this, hopefully better aged bumper. Yeah, that one did age a little bit better. That's nice. And now we're going to talk about a little bit of football, and we're going to start off by talking about the college football playoff right up there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Whiteboard Wednesday, college football edition this time. College football playoff coming up. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest college football fan or the biggest college football expert, but I still enjoy the sport, so I figured I'd just give some quick predictions on that. We're going to start with our 2-3 matchup, Michigan and TCU. No disrespect to TCU. I think Michigan is probably the far better team in this scenario. TCU's had a great year, but Michigan, what I saw them do against Ohio State is one of the more impressive victories I've ever seen in the entire sport. They dominated, outright dominated at home what was, we thought, the second best team in the country at the time. So I'm going to say Michigan wins this one. I'm going to say it's probably somewhere in the realm of 33-16, something like that. TCU may put up a fight early on in the game, but I think Michigan's going to wear them down. And that brings us to our 1-4 matchup, Georgia versus Ohio State. I think this is going to be the far closer game, ladies and gentlemen, because up until Michigan played them, we thought Ohio State was the second best team in the country. For 11 weeks, they looked like the most well-balanced team in the country. And now they're going to have 5 weeks of being told that they're soft and that Michigan's better and yada, yada, yada. And they're going to have a psychological advantage going into this game. And while I think Georgia's still very good, they don't have nearly the talent they did last year, and sometimes they struggle to find their identity. Whereas with Ohio State, at this point, they're playing with nothing to lose. They can just cut it loose. And as we saw a couple years ago when they played Clemson in that semifinal, when they cut it loose, they are dangerous. So I think Georgia still takes it, but it's probably something like 36-30, and it is going to be very scary for Georgia the entire way. So that brings us to our national championship matchup, Georgia versus Michigan. Like I said before, I think Michigan is the far more concrete identity, and when they're on, they are really on. But I think Georgia's on more often, and while they have a less concrete identity, I think they have better talent. This will be a good, close game, but I think at the end of the day, Georgia's going to take it, and my score prediction would be something around the realm of, let's say, 28-20. I like a lot of what I've seen with Michigan in terms of their growth as an offense, being able to throw the ball more, but I still just think Georgia's the best team in the country, and I think that while they're going to be given a run for their money, they're going to be able to pull this one out. Yeah. That's all I got to say. No more games on this board. So back to the studio, and we'll talk about some NFL. Okay, one last note about what I talked about with Michigan. I did pick Georgia to win, but hypothetically, if Michigan were to win, let's think about this for a second. John Harbaugh would have gone to Stanford and turned them into a top 5 program, right? Something nobody ever would have believed he would do. Then he would have gone to the NFL, gone to the Niners, who were horrible before he got there, and taken them to a Super Bowl, then gone to Michigan and built them back up and won a national championship. What happens if he then goes back to the NFL, and obviously this would take a lot, but if he won a Super Bowl, at that point, what do we say about him? At that point, is he the greatest coach in the history of American football? Not just NFL, not just college, but like in totality. It's just, I heard that take the other day, and I thought it was so interesting. And I think we got to keep an eye on that because he got beat by his brother in the one Super Bowl he made it to. So that might be a thing that's kind of been nagging at him. You know, do his cousins think his brother's the better coach? Stuff like that. Anywho, we're going to do what he told me to do about a minute ago. And we're going to talk about some NFL, and we're going to give the obligatory Super Bowl prediction type thing. So obviously, this NFL season has kind of just been turning everything on its head. The Bills are really good early on, and now they're kind of falling off. And the Chiefs have been good throughout, but they've had some losses where you're like, huh, what's going on there? The Buccaneers have just, I don't even want to think about it. The Patriots, I'm going to spoil the end of this segment right now. The Patriots are not my Super Bowl pick. I'm sorry. If you thought they would be, then, I mean, go you, but I don't know where you're getting that idea from. But let's go to what my actual Super Bowl prediction is going to be. So let's start with the NFC. The NFC is too much of a mess for me to have an actual clear picture of what I think is going to happen, because at this point, you could tell me literally anything. I've talked about the Niners a lot this season because they're just so interesting to me. Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt again, and he's going to be out for the season. And now Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick of the draft, is in at quarterback. What happens if he goes on a run now? Because the 49ers, as I talked about a couple weeks ago, have one of the best rosters in the NFL. Like, it is kind of ridiculous the amount of talent that they have. So if he's just competent, or God forbid they sign like Baker Mayfield, listen, I know a lot of people talk trash about Baker Mayfield, and I get it. He's not the greatest quarterback in the world. But he's good enough that with a roster like that, I don't know, man. Admittedly, Shanahan came out yesterday and said, I would be very surprised if we signed Baker Mayfield. Yeah, okay. Everybody's going to say that, though. So I would not think that rules out anything. The Buccaneers are going to win the NFC South, and with Tom Brady, you can never count them out in the playoffs, but I truly just think there are teams with better rosters. The Vikings are just weird, just straight across the board, because they have such a good record, but they are so fundamentally broken as a team in terms of their ceiling. Like, they're 10-2, and I literally don't think anybody actually believes in them. It is one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my entire life. But that moves us to the two teams who I truly think have a chance in the NFC, the Cowboys and the Eagles. They look like the two most complete and strongest teams in the NFC. But the problem is that they're in the same division, so one of them is going to have to be a wild card, which is wild to me. Because if either of them were in any other division, they would be running away with the league. Can you imagine if the Eagles were in the NFC South? Oh my God, it would be a massacre down there. But that's besides the point. Or even if the Cowboys were down there, that's besides the point. I think, honestly, that is a very good prediction for our NFC Championship game, assuming Brock Purdy isn't the greatest quarterback of all time secretly. But I just think the Eagles are the more complete team. Their one weakness as a team is that you can beat them throwing the ball down the field. And while that's a little concerning, what I would say is that the Cowboys don't have a great capacity for throwing the ball down the field. They're not horrible at it. They're certainly better than the Titans were, and the Eagles just massacred the Titans. They're better than the Titans were. And there's rumors about them signing Odell. I would worry about looking at Odell as your savior just because he hasn't played in 10 months. While the Cowboys can throw the ball down the field, it's not exactly the strength of the team, but the Eagles can get pressure on Dak. They can at least put a bit of a cap on that strong running game, and they can take advantage of every tiny weakness in that Cowboys defense. So I would say that the Eagles are probably my NFC Super Bowl pick, as cliche as it might be. And moving over to the AFC. Some of you who have been watching this show for a while might think you have a good idea of what my pick would be, because I've been talking about the Chiefs all season as a team that I think is just foolish to not pick. And you know what? I wish I had more gumption than I do, because while I have been saying that all season, and while I have been talking about how Patrick Mahomes is so clearly the best player in the league, and I still think that, by the way, he's still the best player in the league, he should still be the MVP of the league. Here's the thing. This Sunday they played the Bengals again, and they lost again. And it's starting to become something I can't ignore. Within the last 11 months, they have played the Bengals 3 times, and the Bengals have beaten them all 3 times. No team has ever done that to the Chiefs. It hasn't happened. So the Bengals clearly have to have something different about them that I don't know that the Chiefs can just fix, because all these games have played out the same. The Chiefs dominate the first half, the Bengals come back in the second half, they kick a field goal to take a 3-point lead, and either they hold them off at the end or they kick another field goal to, in the case of the AFC Championship, send them to the Super Bowl. This time it was they kicked a field goal to give them a 3-point lead. They kicked another field goal to make it 6, I believe. The Chiefs got the ball back, but they punted it back to them. The Bengals got that first down. Good night, Irene. So, as much as I have been talking about the Chiefs as this great team, who I think they're just so good because they have Patrick Mahomes, I think I have to pick the Bengals to come out of the AFC until it is proven otherwise, that the Chiefs can pick them. So as shocking as it is to me personally, because the Bengals are still a wild card team right now, my Super Bowl prediction is Eagles coming out of the NFC and Bengals coming out of the AFC. And in terms of who I think wins that, I've seen the Bengals in this spot before, and they were this close to winning. If it weren't for Aaron Donald making one of the greatest plays of his career, Joe Burrow hits Jamar Chase running down the near sideline for what is probably the greatest touchdown in Super Bowl history. Nobody ever talks about that. That almost happened. But yeah, I think it's going to be the Eagles versus the Bengals in this Super Bowl, and I think in a very tight game, the Bengals' experience proves to come through in the end, and they take it. Yeah. But yeah, that's going to do it for my Super Bowl prediction segment. Thank you all for tuning in. Quick least valuable player of the week. It's just going to be Anthony Davis because he went out for having the flu, even though he could have had a very cool flu game, and it would have been really cool for his MVP case. Anthony, suck it up. But in actuality, that is going to do it for the show this week. Thank you to my crew in there. Thank you to the Kingswood Multimedia Department for making this all possible. I will see you all in 2 weeks.